Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Chief, The Life of William Randolph Hearst, by David Nasaw, narrated by David Colacci. Preface. William Randolph Hearst was a huge man with a tiny voice, a shy man who was most comfortable in crowds, a war hawk in Cuba and Mexico, but a pacifist in Europe, an autocratic boss who could not fire people, a devoted husband who lived with his mistress, a Californian who spent half his life in the East. The son of a 49er emigrant from Missouri who had made millions by digging in the earth, Hearst did not identify with those who had inherited wealth or social position. He considered himself a self-made man because, like his father and his mother, he invented himself as art collector, builder, journalist, publisher, and politician. His ambitions were limitless, but so too were his talents and resources. He was in all things defined by contradiction, larger than life. When Hearst was in college, he wrote his father that he intended to do something in publishing and politics, and he did, becoming San Francisco's, then New York's, and finally the nation's most powerful publisher. He served 2 terms in Congress, came in second in the balloting for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1904, and was, for half a century, a major force in American politics, at the national, state, and local levels. He was also one of the 20th century's greatest spenders. Fortune magazine in 1935 reported that his art collections were worth at least $20 million, $250 million in today's currency, and his ranches, mines, orchards, and packing plants another $30 million. His real estate holdings in New York City were assessed at $41 million. He was, according to Fortune, the city's #1 realtor. There has never been, nor most likely will there ever be again, a publisher like William Randolph Hearst. The Chief, as he was known by those who worked for him, built the nation's first media conglomerate by extending his newspaper empire horizontally into syndicated feature, photo, and wire services, magazines, newsreels, serial, feature, and animated films, and radio. With each triumph, his sense of omnipotence swelled. The opportunities were limitless for expanding his empire and his audiences, and he capitalized on every one of them. Decades before synergy became a corporate cliché, Hearst put the concept into practice. His magazine editors were directed to buy only stories which could be rewritten into screenplays to be produced by his film studio and serialized, reviewed, and publicized in his newspapers and magazines. He broadcast the news from his papers over the radio and pictured it in his newsreels. He was as dominant and pioneering a figure in the 20th century communications and entertainment industries as Andrew Carnegie had been in steel, J. Pierpont Morgan in banking, John D. Rockefeller in oil, and Thomas Alva Edison in electricity. At the peak of his power in the middle 1930s, Time magazine estimated his newspaper audience alone at 20 million of the 120-plus million men, women, and children in the nation. His daily and Sunday papers were so powerful as vehicles of public opinion in the United States that Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Winston Churchill all wrote for him. In the great tradition of 19th century orator-editors like Horace Greeley, Charles Dana, William Cullen Bryant, and Joseph Pulitzer, Hearst took upon himself the role of tribune of the people. Through the first decades of the 20th century, as older press lords died off and were replaced by a new breed of editors who, like Adolph S. Oakes of the New York Times, shunned publicity and made sure their names appeared only on their mastheads, Hearst employed the power of the media to set the national political agenda, first as a muckraking progressive trust-buster, then, in his 70s, as an opponent of the New Deal and a stalwart anti-communist. He set the topics, dictated the tone, and edited all the editorials in his papers. The major ones he wrote himself and displayed prominently on his front pages. He endorsed candidates for office and condemned them when they betrayed their promises. He emblazoned his name on his magazines, his newsreels, and his radio outlets. He proudly proclaimed that while other newspapers merely reported the news, his newspapers made it. I did not set out to write a biography of William Randolph Hearst, but to use him as a focal point from which to discuss the interpenetration of culture and politics in the 20th century. Only as I began my research did I come to realize that the story of William Randolph Hearst was yet to be told. There were some fine biographies dating from the 1950s and 1960s, but none had been able to call upon the vast archival resources that have become available since then. I was able to start fresh, to detour around the anecdotal information that my predecessors had had to rely on, and to base my study on hundreds of thousands of letters, telegrams, memoranda, transcripts of phone messages, articles, and editorials that Hearst had written or that had been written to or about him. I began in the Bancroft Library in Berkeley, California, which held collections of Hearst correspondence dating back to the 1860s, when Hearst's mother Phoebe arrived in San Francisco from Missouri with her husband, the millionaire miner and future United States Senator George Hearst. I moved on from there to dozens of manuscript collections scattered across the country, the papers of every president from William McKinley to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, those of Hearst's editors, friends, political advisers, and adversaries, and of his architect at San Simeon, Julia Morgan. At the Hearst San Simeon Historical Monument, I was given access to an extensive unpublished oral history collection that contained dozens of interviews with friends, family, servants, and business associates. At the end of my research, I was able to fill in some of the missing pieces by consulting private and business papers that had been stored in a warehouse in the Bronx since the early 1920s, and at a bunkhouse at one of the Hearst Corporation ranches in San Simeon. The Hearst I discovered was infinitely more fascinating than the one I had expected to find. This was also Winston Churchill's experience during his visit with Hearst at San Simeon and Los Angeles in 1929. "Hearst was most interesting to meet," Churchill wrote his wife Clementine, who had remained in England. "I got to like him. A grave, simple child, with no doubt a nasty temper, playing with the most costly toys. A vast income always overspent, ceaseless building and collecting, 2 magnificent establishments, 2 charming wives, complete indifference to public opinion, a strong liberal and democratic outlook, a 15 million daily circulation, Oriental hospitalities, extreme personal courtesy, to us at any rate, and the appearance of a Quaker elder, or perhaps better Mormon elder." After a long weekend at San Simeon, Churchill was driven to Los Angeles, where he stayed at the Biltmore Hotel, which is the last word in hotels. "I met all the leading people. These Californian swells do not, of course, know Hearst," Churchill wrote his wife. "He dwells apart. They regard him as the devil." 1. Great Expectations. 1. A Son of the West. William Randolph Hearst did not speak often of his father. He preferred to think of himself as sui generis and self-created, which in many ways he was. Only in his late 70s, when he began writing a daily column in his newspapers, did he remind his readers, and himself, that he was the son of a pioneer. In a column about the song "O Susanna," which he claimed his father had sung to him, Hearst recounted the hardships George Hearst had endured on his 1,000-mile trek from Missouri to California in 1850. There was a pride in the telling and in the story. His father had been one of the lucky ones, one of the stronger ones. While others had died of cholera or were...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?